As the fire went out slowly at the Winter Olympics in PyeongChang, South Korea, in what has been a smooth Olympic Games, we can commend South Korea on hosting a successful event. Among the greatest achievers were Norway, Germany, and Canada, who were deemed the clear victors. Surprisingly, the U.S. came away with 23 medals only, and China a lower 9. Equally, smaller nations did well, and nations from Africa and Caribbean nations made history in competing for the first time in various events. With that being said, how is China going to proceed in its future Winter Olympics endeavor? And what will happen to the U.S.? What has happened to the U.S. medal machine, and how well did South Korea in hosting the Winter Olympics? So to discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Mr. Yan Chang, a sports journalist, and Mr. Dong Jun, a sports podcaster with EI China Limited. And we shall also cross over live to our CGTN correspondent, Shen Han, in Seoul. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's take a quick look at this background report.
With Beijing hosting the next Winter Olympics in 2022, China was hoping for a strong result in PyeongChang, but their games were a mixture of disappointment and elation. Short track speed skating is the country's strongest discipline, but a controversial disqualification in the final of the women's 3,000-meter relay left the team and its fans frustrated. China's angst on the ice was tempered by the emergence of young stars, as 17-year-old Li Jinyu won silver in the ladies' 1,500-meter short track, and 20-year-old Gao Tingyu became the first Chinese man to medal in speed skating, with a bronze in the 500 meters, but seemed more focused on simpler issues.
For me, the Olympic experience is not different from the usual races. The living conditions are more confined and the food is safer. It's pretty good.
China also found success in a new sport, as Liu Jiayu won silver in women's snowboarding halfpipe for her country's first medal in the event, while a diminutive duo of Chinese figure skaters, Cui Wenjing and Han Cong, were less than half a point from claiming gold in the pairs contest, proving they have a very bright future. But on day 13 of the Games, China was still without a gold, and the attention turned once again to short track speed skating. Carrying the hopes of more than 1 billion Chinese on his shoulders, Wu Dajing would set 2 world records to win the men's 500 meters and deliver the much sought-after gold in stunning fashion.
No matter how the competition has developed, it is now finished, and it's time for us to summarize the experience. Like I said, I'm more looking forward to the Games in Beijing in 2022. I think our Chinese delegation will have a better result.
And less than 1 hour later, Wu, the first man to win gold for China in short track, would lead his team to silver in the 5,000-meter relay. China will go home with 9 medals from these Olympics, with 1 gold, 6 silver, and 2 bronze.
Hey, gentlemen, I'm afraid that the Chinese would have a very strong mixed feeling about the so-called success of the Winter Olympics in the ROK, because, you know, we only got 1 gold medal. However, don't you think it is Mr. Kim Jong-un who should deserve credit for ensuring success, at least part and parcel, in having a smooth completion of the event?
We must praise our North Korean neighbors, you know, for their great contribution to give us this chance of having a very peaceful, smooth Olympics by simply doing nothing.
By suspending their nuclear missile tests.
Yes.
And
Paul, what are your thoughts?
In the 11th hour, the 2 sides agreed to send the delegations and march into hand in hand into the opening ceremony of the, of the Games.
Yeah, I mean, for the opening ceremony, the most exciting eye-opening moment came when cheerleaders from the DPRK came over. The Chinese were mesmerized by how they look instead of what they did.
Not only in the opening ceremony, and for the whole week, you know, afterwards, in all kinds of media, you took sight of all kinds of pictures of those cheerleaders from North Korea, of their postures, you know, of their dancing style. You know, I'm not sure whether this will become the new Gangnam style of becoming kind of viral on social media. That's a good sign of the Winter Olympics.
It was extremely popular, yes.
Gentlemen, when did Seoul host that Olympics whose theme song is Hand in Hand? That Summer Olympics
in 1988
in Seoul.
Yeah. Hand in hand, eternally the flames would blah blah. And I'm so familiar with the theme song. What do you think of the Olympic spirit in putting the two Koreas together? I mean, do you think that we are politicizing the sports event, or this is something that we must commend?
I think this is a great reflection of the Olympic spirit. You know, in ancient times, you know, all nations would cease fire and you know, let all people enjoy this kind of spirit to get together. And even in modern Olympics, we could see that all nations still stick to this tradition. That's a good sign of that, whether it's politics or not.
Maybe I think from day one, politics were always involved with the Olympic movement. And during the Games, there were, you know, throughout the entire history, of course, it could be inclusive. Sometimes we have boycotting countries and we have political issues. And you have to live with it. That's part of the, you know, life with the Olympic movement. And don't forget that back in 1988, when the song Hand in Hand was sung, there were no North Koreans seen in that stadium.
After the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, their Olympics were boycotted by Americans and their allies. So political issue is always one of the front page stories concerning the competition in the sports events in the Olympics. By the way, let me cross over to our CGTN correspondent Shin Ham, who's standing by in Seoul, ROK, for his comments on the latest development. Hi, Shin. My question is very much about what is the most exciting front page story today for South Koreans with the successful conclusion of the Winter Olympics?
Well, I think everyone here, it's safe to say that we're very impressed by the way the Olympics were run. But I do want to comment on the cheerleaders, the DPRK cheerleaders you were talking about a moment ago. Here in South Korea, we've seen these DPRK cheerleaders participate in sporting events dating all the way back, from my memory, the 2002 Asian Games when they were held in Busan. And I'd have to say that the attention that they received from the South Korean public and the media here was far less once the opening ceremonies and events started taking place here. In fact, some would say that they were kind of overshadowed by the games themselves. But I do agree with the politicization of these Olympics that dates back decades. Of course, they do go hand in hand. No pun intended there, but I think overall the overall consensus is that these Olympics were successful from an organizing standpoint.
There's no question that South Korea deserves credit for taking away the biggest gold medal. You are, after all, a wonderful, warm-hearted host country. By the way, with the inter-Korean settlements soaring to a historic high, we are asking questions, tons of questions as to what's going to happen next. Do you believe Mr. Woon Jae-in will go to the DPRK and have a summit meeting talking about the national reconciliation and, of course, the denuclearization? What do you think of the momentum?
Well, I think we're already seeing what's happening next. We have this high-ranking delegation that participated or took part in the closing ceremony. Still here in South Korea, we know that the head of the delegation there met with the head of Korea's National Intelligence Service. He had a lunch there at the presidential office. Details are not coming out. We do know that President Moon Jae-in and both sides, the DPRK has said it is willing to sit down with the United States, that the door is open, and we've heard from the U.S. overnight that we'll see, was the comment from the U.S. White House here. So the momentum is there in terms of rapprochement. But we talked about, of course, we've talked about several times the upcoming possible joint military drills. So it'll be interesting to see before President Moon Jae-in would ever hold a summit meeting with the DPRK's leader, Kim Jong-un. A lot needs to happen before that time, whether it leads to denuclearization and whatnot. So I think before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to see what happens over the next few years.
Let's look at the Chinese elements. Despite the very embarrassing lackluster performance of the Chinese athletes in PyeongChang, we managed to present a wonderful 8-minute performance at the closing ceremony to impress our South Korean friends. What do you think of the readiness, if any, of the next host city, Beijing, to take over the torch and the flag, of course?
Well, I think with Beijing hosting the next Winter Games, a lot has been said about the next 2 Olympics being held in this region. Of course, the 2020 Summer Games in Tokyo and the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. And of course, what we saw in 2008, there's no doubt that China will be, and Beijing will be a wonderful host. We know that officials from Tokyo, organizing committee officials from Tokyo and from the Beijing Olympic committees were also embedded into the PyeongChang organizing committee to gain that know-how or that expertise and to learn from any mistakes that were made to keep this momentum going so that successful games are held in 2022. And there were a lot of obstacles, of course, leading into these games. But again, once that puck dropped or the starter's light went off, I think the games overall went off without too many big hitches.
Thank you so much, Shane. Coming back to the Beijing studio, gentlemen. Let's put aside the Chinese performance, well, for a good reason. But why did Norway do so well?
Oh, Norway is just phenomenal. You know, of course, we all know that Norway is a traditional Nordic sport, a very strong nation in all these winter sports. But for this delegation, there are 2 main factors. You know, Norway, a nation with only 6 million people, they had set up a very strong state. We call that state sports system, which, you know, the state will give very strong financial and support, all kinds of support to this Winter Olympics sports delegation team. And secondly, they prepared very well in about 18 months ahead. You know, for this delegation, they brought one example: 4,000 doses of all these asthma medicines, just in regarding to different air conditions for these Olympics. So they're well prepared and they're ready to take over the power from the so-called superpowers.
Well, isn't it surprising that the Norwegians didn't bring with them masks to prepare for nuclear attacks? So, there's no reason to laugh. I mean, this is a tragedy for countries in Northeast Asia. But
and also, don't forget that the Nordic sports or winter sports started from Europe, pretty much from the Nordic region, and in the first, I think in the first few years, the first edition of the Summer Olympics, it was not called the Summer Olympics. It was simply called the Olympic Games, where we also had figure skating, several skating events included in the Summer Olympic Games before the Winter Games broke away to establish itself every 4 years. And of course, Norway enjoyed tremendous wealth, economic development, economic stability over a century. And Norway has been a strong power to reckon with throughout the entire history of winter sports. And don't forget, back in Sochi, in Russia, Norway finished second only to the Russian delegation. That means
a distant second or an immediate second.
Immediate second, very close. And now, in the absence of the Russian delegation representing the country's Olympic Committee, and then Norway is the automatic force, along with Canada and several others, to fill the vacuum left by the absent Russian team.
What's happened to Russians?
You
went to Sochi Olympic Games. Right.
Sochi was really
Tell us more about the drug issue.
I was there. Sochi was, at that time, is still the most expensive Olympics, you know, including summer and winter Olympics. They invest so much into
the Russian economy was hit so hard by the resource curse.
Yep.
And yet, President Putin, how could he go as far as to invest so much in the Winter Olympics? Is it an issue of image, of soft power, or the reluctance to accept the status quo that it's become, after all, a second-class superpower with the end of the Cold War?
I mean, the conclusion is that, you know, to gain the face values of sports is a very expensive way of doing things. Maybe they could find some other more creative and cost-saver.
That's a very expensive face-saving approach by
services.
this president of the Russian Federation.
But coming back to the former topic of the Norway success, I must admit one bottom line factor is that Winter Olympics sports, especially sports on snow surfaces, is very, very expensive sports. You have to be a very rich nation to afford the participants of these sports.
Do you mean
Norway is a very
do
rich
you
nation.
mean, gentlemen, do you mean the brutal fact is that China has a very bleak future because of the money, the expenditure?
No,
and
I
the
think
wealth?
that
We
would
have
be
the
an
money.
advantage for China. China is not short of money.
I mean, for the ordinary folks, they don't have the money. They don't have the financial muscles to support their participation or even the interest itself in the Winter Games, right?
Yeah, but there are a lot of other northern countries in the world, but their sports in winter Olympics have never developed that much as the very rich Nordic countries. And so I think there are several keywords to the advancement and development of winter sports. And nowadays, one is money, and the other is high technology. And of course, high tech also relies on money so much. So I think you can very easily attribute the successes of such nations as Norway, Finland, Switzerland.
Excuse me, other than the factors, other than the
progress
factors of wealth and technology itself, what about temperature itself? A friend of mine went to Switzerland, and they surprisingly found out that the temperature remains high, and yet the snow conditions remain pretty good.
Yeah, let me give you one.
In China, given the severity of the winter, it's pretty difficult for amateur players to play on the snow.
We call these continental climate, warm climate weather of China, which is not so oceanic. That's the temperature even lower. If we go to Zhangjiakou, I think the temperature for snowy sports would be something like minus 15, minus 20.
Similar
but
to PyeongChang,
when I was
actually.
in Sochi, I was in the mountains for all those skiing competitions, and it was so warm. I was basically literally wearing a T-shirt when I was facing.
That was a challenge for Sochi, actually, somewhat. It was
the snowy condition is not so good.
And it's also very warm in Torino, Italy, and not very cold in Vancouver, of course.
Sometimes you are praying for the weather to be in the very right margin, which is friendly to the audience, but also suitable for the sport. But the balance is quite hard to get.
But it's playing an increasingly important role creating man-made snow to facilitate very high-level competition.
You're talking about money again.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Let's come back to examine closely the issue of drug abuse. Now, do you think Russian grievances are justifiable? They fear that they are being punished for political reasons. After all, they were accused of annexing Crimea, hence the economic embargo against the Russian Federation ever since. Therefore, athletes fell victim to the prejudice or political punishment. What do you think of their concerns?
I think we have put all these factors together, and each one of them might be should be a right one. Russia has a long history from the Soviet Union era. Along with the former East Germany, they have this kind of state-sponsored system of systematic doping, and I can't say it's a legacy, but the residue factors are still there. They're still quite active in current Russian sports.
And so far, we have been only reading, mostly Western media reports on this, and China has yet to, been participating in any of the international actions against Russia, and we don't have much to say about, what has really happened behind the scene. But obviously, China, well, I think the Russian authorities, government haven't denied what has been discovered about those drug abuse cases. So I think there are very strong evidences.
The key whistleblower is one who has worked inside the Russian sports system for about 20 years. He's given a series of hard evidence which is difficult to argue against.
Why did Germany do so well in the ski and snow events of the PyeongChang?
You have to ask why they have been doing so well over the decades. They are among the top, the big powerhouses in the world. Germany,
summer or winter,
among the top 5. This has been the case for many decades.
Maybe a couple of minutes discussing sports education in Germany.
Yep.
Soccer is one thing, Winter Olympics is quite another, and in all areas it seems Germans have been doing so well for decades, as you said, wisely.
Yeah, I have quite a few German friends, some working for FIFA, some working for the other business organizations. All of them will tell you, from elementary school to high school, for the kind of 6 to 7 year period of time, they would at least have actual training of up to 10 different disciplines of sports. That's right in the blood of the German academic education system. Sport is vital. Sport is very important, just as the USA.
Well, it's no big deal. Ping pong is in our DNA of the Chinese. Right, let me cross over to Shen Han for his comments on South Korea. How do you rate the performance of your national players?
Well, it was a record-showing performance. South Korea won 17 medals, finishing 7th place in the medal standings, 5 golds, 8 silvers, and 4 bronze, and they beat out other traditional winter sport powerhouses like France, Switzerland, and Austria. And it really was, you look at where South Korea won medals these Winter Olympics. In the past, before PyeongChang, prior to these games, all Korean medals came from the ice, whether that be short track, long track, speed skating, or figure skating with Kim Yeon-ah back in 2010 and of course in 2014 as well. But this time we saw first-time medals in a sliding event as well as on snow, with of course the gold medal in the men's skeleton and another medal, the silver, in fact, in the snowboard parallel. So a lot of this goes back to accessibility and investments, of course, and that doesn't hold just for the Winter Games. But PyeongChang won the rights to host the Winter Games on its 3rd try. So this is not just 7 years, but this is almost 15 years in the making. And you have, it's also a situation of the chicken or the egg. When do you get investments? You get investments when there is public support for it and success. And one example of that also is curling. The women's curling team captivated the entire nation, finishing silver, unfortunately losing out in the final against Sweden there. But now you're going to see more youngsters being attracted. I'm sure a majority of the country didn't know what curling is before these games. Well, so a lot of it has to do with time and accessibility and investment, and I'm sure that's part of the reason why South Korea did so well these games.
Well, given the deep economic integration and the increase of people-to-people exchange between our two economies, South Korea and China, in recent decades, the Chinese do share the defining moments of your glories in the competition. However, having said this, Shen, many Chinese audiences complain bitterly that Chinese athletes have been treated unfairly in terms of, the violation of the rules. What do you think of our concerns?
Well, the sport of short track speed skating is always with controversy, and South Korea, of course, being a powerhouse in this discipline, is not a stranger at all to these sort of controversies as well. I can go back to 2002 during the Salt Lake Winter Games when Apollo Anton Ono, the U.S. speed skater, what seemed to be what many here called Hollywood action, an overly aggressive movement there to what South Koreans believe was to try and sway the officials' judgments, and a South Korean skater was robbed, according to South Korean fans, of a gold medal in that case. So if you look at the sport itself, it leaves up to this sort of controversy and this debate and discussion that fans love to have, and that's part of the enjoyment of sports. And the hope is, of course, that this just stays on the ice and this doesn't lead to more broader diplomatic or political problems, because at the end of the day, it is a sport, and fair play and really the officials' judgments, and possibly, who knows, if home ice advantage played a part in that. But China, of course, will have that opportunity in 2022 as well.
Thank you so much, Shen. We do have a lot to learn from our South Korean friends to catch up quickly, to prepare for what's going to happen 4 years from now. Thank you so much for being with us, Shen. Let's discuss why the Chinese remain pretty quiet on the social media about how to be politically correct concerning the controversy of the short track speed skating.
Not really quiet. It was
not really quiet?
It went viral for the first couple of days, but by the by, when we see so many so many controversies, relating to the reference. So
is that an issue of nationalism?
We got tired about that.
Or do you think we're not ready yet to return to the spirit of sport itself?
Well, I think before the Chinese delegation went to PyeongChang, when people were discussing about how many gold medals will be in hand for China to grab, and I warned them that most of those hopes that China look at would also be head-on-head competing against the host nation. The South Koreans happen to be good at the same event, and that has already happened back in 1988 in the Summer Olympics. And don't forget, in the 2002 World Cup, South Korea did remarkably well as a host nation to enter into the semifinals. So China should be better prepared for this. And at the same time, of course, although China has been already quite strong in short track speed skating, but second to South Korea, of course. And the entire nation, I mean, the population has been relatively, unknowledgeable about all the sports rules. And by following the Olympic events, they started this learning process, and they got confused. So
yes, indeed, PyeongChang should be part of the learning curve for Chinese audiences and the lovers of the Winter Olympics. Let's look at what preparations should the host city of Beijing and Zhangjiakou make 4 years from now. The bird's nest, Niaochao, will be the venue for the opening and the closing ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games 4 years from now. Do you think that will be yet another spectacle like what happened in the year 2008, the Summer Olympic Games?
I think that's a guaranteed thing, especially after we saw the Beijing 8 minutes last night at the closing ceremony. I think China is famous for this kind of artificial pronunciation.
Don't forget, Zhang Yimou will perhaps be yet another director.
But I'm a bit surprised that it is him again. Nothing against him, but...
Are you surprised or ashamed or embarrassed? what exactly is your feeling?
A bit tired about that.
A bit tired. But
I think
we have the freedom of speech here. Don't worry.
Right.
Yeah.
I think 2022 would be triple challenge for China. One, playing host to the Winter Olympics for the first time ever, and secondly, try to win as many medals as possible. I'll be absolutely better than in PyeongChang.
Yep.
And the third challenge will be even bigger, which will be to make as many as 300 million people practicing sports on ice or snow. And that is a huge challenge to achieve within 4 years.
Biggest one.
Yeah.
I think we could easily meet our targets for the first two. But for the third one, China's climate and all this popularity of winter sports are still in the process. Of course, I would guarantee the process will be much, much more faster than our progress in
the last question is very much about the management and the leadership of the Chinese sports administration. We know that there is this new generation of the leadership, and with that comes perhaps the new notion about how to administer state-sponsored events. What do you think of the prospects under the new leadership? Paul?
I think the biggest challenge for him or his team is how to balance experience that they can learn from their predecessor, but at the same time come up with creative ideas of how to push things forward. I think that will not be easy for anyone.
PyeongChang is obviously a wake-up call for this new generation of the leadership of the Chinese sports administration. They need to learn, they need to lick the wounds at the same time to get prepared for perhaps a better future 4 years from now. We'll wait to see what's going to happen. I thank you so much for watching. Until next time, goodbye.